Sarah Matthews never imagined her Tuesday afternoon would end with her holding a high-powered sniper rifle while a group of Navy SEALs watched her every move. The 28-year-old journalist had been covering military training exercises for the past 3 years, but today was different. Today, she was about to discover something about herself that would change everything. The morning had started normally enough. Sarah arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Southern California just after dawn, her press credentials hanging from her neck and her camera bag weighing heavy on her shoulder. She had interviewed dozens of special operations personnel over the years, written countless articles about military preparedness, and attended more training demonstrations than she could count. But she had never actually participated in anything beyond the standard safety briefings. The base was alive with activity as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Groups of trainees ran past in formation, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. The smell of gun oil and fresh paint mixed with the salty air blowing in from the ocean. Sarah made her way to the long-range shooting facility, where she was scheduled to observe a marksmanship training session. Her editor wanted a human interest piece about the precision and dedication required to become a military sniper. Commander Jake Harrison was the SEAL instructor she had been assigned to shadow for the day. He was a man in his early 40s with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. When Sarah introduced herself, he gave her a firm handshake and a brief smile that suggested he had better things to do than babysit a journalist. The shooting range stretched out before them like a moonscape of carefully maintained terrain. Targets were positioned at various distances, some visible to the naked eye, others requiring high-powered optics to even locate. Harrison explained that today's training focused on extreme long-range shooting, with targets placed anywhere from 500 to over 1,000 meters away. Sarah listened intently, taking notes as Harrison described the factors that affected long-range accuracy: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, elevation, the rotation of the Earth itself, all played a role in where a bullet would land at extreme distances. She watched as SEAL candidates took their positions, each one settling into the prone position with practiced ease. The concentration on their faces was absolute. The first shooter took his time, adjusting his scope and checking his data book. Sarah could see him making tiny adjustments to his position, shifting his body by mere millimeters. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the crack of the rifle was sharp and sudden. Through the spotting scope, Sarah watched as dust kicked up several inches to the left of the target at 700 meters. Harrison called out corrections in a calm, measured voice. The shooter made adjustments and fired again. This time, the bullet struck closer but still missed the mark. It took 3 more shots before he finally hit the center of the target. The other SEALs watching gave quiet nods of approval. Throughout the morning, Sarah observed the intense focus and dedication these men brought to their craft. Each shot was a calculation, a meditation, a test of skill and patience. She scribbled notes furiously, already composing paragraphs in her mind about the warrior zen of long-range marksmanship. During a break, Harrison approached her with a strange expression on his face. He had been watching her watch the shooters, and something had caught his attention. Sarah had been unconsciously mimicking the shooters' breathing patterns, her body tensing and relaxing in sync with theirs as they prepared to fire. "You seem pretty interested in this," Harrison said, sipping water from a canteen. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "It's fascinating. The level of control these guys have is incredible. I've covered a lot of military training, but this is something else entirely." Harrison studied her for a moment, then asked, "You ever shoot before?" "Just basic handgun training for a story I did last year," Sarah admitted. "Nothing like this." What happened next would become the subject of debate among the SEALs for months to come. Harrison made a decision that broke with protocol, that defied standard operating procedures, that went against every rule about civilian participation in military training exercises. But sometimes, instinct tells you something that rules and regulations cannot. He gestured toward the shooting line. "Come on, let's see something." Sarah's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "I'm just here to observe. Consider it part of your research," Harrison said with a slight grin. "Can't write accurately about something you've never experienced, right?" Before Sarah could fully process what was happening, she found herself being led to a shooting position. Several of the SEAL candidates watched with curiosity as this civilian journalist was brought into their domain. Some exchanged skeptical glances. Others simply watched with professional detachment. Harrison had one of his team members bring over a rifle, the Mk-13 Mod 7, a weapon system Sarah had read about, but never touched. The rifle was heavy, substantial, built for precision at extreme distances. Her hands felt clumsy as Harrison showed her how to hold it properly. "This isn't about you hitting anything," Harrison explained as he helped her into a prone position. "This is about you feeling what it's like to be behind one of these. Understanding the weight, the recoil, the responsibility of it." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she settled onto the mat. The rifle felt alien against her shoulder, too heavy, too powerful, too much. Harrison knelt beside her, adjusting her position with practiced efficiency. He moved her left elbow out slightly, pressed her right shoulder more firmly into the stock, repositioned her cheek against the rest. "Look through the scope," he instructed. "Tell me what you see." Sarah peered through the optic and gasped. The target, a small steel plate nearly a quarter-mile away, jumped into sharp focus. She could see the pockmarks where previous bullets had struck, could make out individual grains in the metal surface. It was like looking through a window into another world. "The target is at 850 meters, Harrison said. "Wind is blowing left to right at about 8 knots. Temperature is 72 degrees. All of that matters, but don't worry about it for now. Just get a feel for the weapon." What Sarah didn't know was that this was meant to be a brief demonstration, a moment of experience she could reference in her article. Harrison planned to let her dry fire the weapon, to squeeze the trigger on an empty chamber so she could feel the mechanics without actually sending a bullet downrange. It was standard procedure for familiarizing civilians with weapon systems. But then, Sergeant Mike Torres, one of the younger SEALs, decided to have a bit of fun. Torres was known for his sense of humor, for finding levity in the most serious situations. He was well liked by his teammates, respected for his skills, and occasionally prone to pranks that walked the line between funny and foolish. As Sarah settled into position, as her finger rested along the side of the rifle frame in the proper safety position, Torres saw an opportunity he couldn't resist. He reached out and gave Sarah's arm a playful tug, not hard, just a gentle pull meant to make her laugh, to break the tension of the moment. It was meant to be a joke, a tiny moment of levity in an otherwise serious day. But Torres hadn't realized that Harrison had already loaded the rifle. In the military, especially in special operations units, there are procedures for everything. Weapons are cleared and checked multiple times. Live ammunition is handled with extreme care. Everyone follows the same protocols to prevent accidents. But in that moment, in the chaos of an unplanned demonstration, a single round had been chambered without the usual announcements and confirmations. When Torres tugged Sarah's arm, her finger slipped from its position along the frame. It brushed against the trigger guard, then touched the trigger itself. The rifle was in battery, the safety was off, and Sarah's startled reaction to Torres's tug caused her to squeeze. The rifle roared. The sound was deafening, even with hearing protection. The recoil hammered into Sarah's shoulder with brutal force, knocking her slightly askew. Her eyes clenched shut instinctively, and for a moment, all she could register was shock and confusion. Around her, there was sudden movement, sharp voices, the controlled chaos of professionals responding to an unexpected discharge. Harrison was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to secure the weapon. Torres stepped back, his face going pale as he realized what had happened. The other SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, some checking the range for any signs of danger, others focusing on Sarah. "Everyone okay?" Harrison barked, his voice cutting through the confusion. Sarah's ears were ringing despite the hearing protection. Her shoulder throbbed where the rifle had kicked back. Her hands were shaking as she released the weapon, letting Harrison take control of it. She felt dizzy, disoriented, overwhelmed by what had just happened. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. It's not your fault," Harrison said firmly, though his jaw was tight with tension. He turned to Torres with a look that promised a serious conversation later. "Nobody's fault, but ours. This shouldn't have happened." One of the SEALs had been watching through a spotting scope, trained on the 850-meter target as a matter of habit. He stood up slowly, lowering the scope with a puzzled expression on his face. Everyone turned to look at him. "Commander," the SEAL said, his voice uncertain. "You need to see this." Harrison moved to the spotting scope and peered through it. His body went still. He looked through the scope for a long moment, then stood up and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. It was somewhere between disbelief and something else entirely. "What?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Did I hit something I wasn't supposed to?" Harrison didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed the spotting scope to another SEAL, who looked through it and let out a low whistle. One by one, the other team members took turns looking, and each one had the same reaction. Shock, followed by careful scrutiny, followed by more shock. Finally, Harrison turned to Sarah. "You hit the target." Sarah blinked. "What?" "The 850-meter target. Center mass. You hit it." The words didn't make sense at first. Sarah had barely been holding the rifle correctly. She had never fired anything larger than a handgun. She hadn't been aiming, hadn't been breathing correctly, hadn't done any of the 1,000 things that long-range shooting required. It had been an accident, a mistake, a discharge caused by surprise, and poor finger discipline. "That's not possible," Sarah said. "Look for yourself." With shaking hands, Sarah took the spotting scope and aimed it downrange. It took her a moment to steady it, to focus on the target that seemed impossibly far away. When she finally got a clear view, she could see it. Right in the center of the steel plate, slightly to the left of several older impact marks, was a fresh strike. The metal was bright where the copper jacket had scraped away the weathered surface. "That could have been from someone else," Sarah said weakly, even though she knew the range had been cold, knew that she had been the only one to fire in the past several minutes. One of the SEALs jogged downrange with a handheld radio. They watched as he approached the target, examined it closely, then spoke into his radio. His voice crackled over the speaker, tinny and distant, but clear enough. "Impact is fresh. Copper scoring is still bright. Looks like a 7.62 NATO from the impact pattern." This was from the last shot, no question. Harrison rubbed his face with both hands, trying to process what had just happened. In his 15 years of training snipers, in all his combat deployments, in everything he had seen and done, he had never witnessed anything like this. Long-range shooting was a skill that took months or years to develop. It required knowledge, practice, physical conditioning, mental discipline. It wasn't something that happened by accident. But here was a civilian journalist, a woman who had never fired a rifle like this before, who had just put a round on target at 850 meters under conditions that would challenge even experienced shooters. The wind hadn't been in her favor. The position hadn't been perfect. She hadn't been properly braced for recoil. By every measure, she should have missed by a wide margin. Yet she hadn't. Torres stood off to the side, his earlier humor completely gone. He kept opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again. The gravity of what could have happened was settling over him. An accidental discharge was serious business, something that could end careers. But the impossible accuracy of that accidental shot had created a situation no one knew quite how to handle. Sarah set down the spotting scope and looked at her hands. They had stopped shaking, though she wasn't sure when that had happened. She felt strange, disconnected from the moment, as if she were watching herself from outside her body. Part of her was still terrified by what had happened. Another part was confused by everyone's reactions. And a small, quiet part deep inside felt something else entirely. It felt right. The weight of the rifle, the view through the scope, the moment of focus just before the trigger broke. All of it had felt natural in a way she couldn't explain. Even the recoil, brutal as it was, had felt like something her body understood instinctively. "Commander Harrison," one of the SEALs said quietly, "what do we do about this?" Harrison was silent for a long moment, staring at the distant target as if it might offer him answers. Then, he looked at Sarah, really looked at her, seeing something he hadn't noticed before. There was a quality to her focus, a steadiness in her gaze that reminded him of his best shooters. "We clear the weapon," Harrison said finally. "We secure the range. And then, we figure out exactly what just happened here." But, as the team moved to follow his orders, as the initial shock began to wear off, one thing had become very clear to everyone present. Something impossible had just occurred, and the woman standing among them, still processing her own confusion and fear, had just demonstrated an ability that defied explanation. The question wasn't whether Sarah Matthews could shoot. The question was what they were going to do about it now that they knew she could. The debriefing room was small and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal. Sarah sat in a metal chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Commander Harrison filled out an incident report while two other senior officers discussed the situation in low voices near the door. It had been 3 hours since the shot. 3 hours of questions, documentation, and careful review of what had happened. The range had been shut down immediately. Every piece of equipment had been inspected. The rifle had been cleared and secured. Statements had been taken from everyone present. And, through it all, Sarah had replayed that moment over and over in her mind, trying to understand how she had done something that should have been impossible. Harrison finished writing and looked up at her. His expression had softened somewhat from the stern professionalism he had maintained since the incident. He looked tired, and Sarah realized this was probably going to cause him a significant amount of paperwork and scrutiny. "I'm really sorry," Sarah said again, her voice hoarse from answering questions. "I know this has created problems for you." Harrison waved the apology away. "Torres created the problem. You were just along for the ride." He paused, then added, "Though I should have been more careful about the weapon status. That's on me." One of the officers by the door, a captain whose name Sarah had already forgotten, cleared his throat. "Ms. Matthews, we need to be very clear about something. What happened today was an accident. A serious breach of safety protocols. You understand that, correct?" Sarah nodded. "Absolutely. I never should have been in that position in the first place." "Right," the captain continued. "However, there's also the matter of the result. The shot itself." He exchanged a glance with Harrison. "Commander Harrison has suggested something unusual. Something we need your permission to pursue." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Look, I've been training shooters for over a decade. I've seen naturals, people who pick up the skill faster than others. But what you did today goes beyond that. Most trained snipers would be happy to hit that target under those conditions. For you to do it on what was essentially your first shot with that weapon system, without proper instruction, without even intending to fire, that's not normal." "It was luck," Sarah insisted, even though a part of her wasn't entirely sure. "Maybe," Harrison acknowledged. "That's what we need to find out. I want to test you. Properly this time, in a controlled environment. See if you can replicate anything close to that performance." Sarah stared at him. "You want me to shoot again?" "Only if you're willing. And, before you answer, understand that this is completely voluntary. You have every right to walk away from here right now and never think about firearms again. No one would blame you." The captain added, "This wouldn't be part of any official program. Just an informal assessment. Commander Harrison's curiosity, if you will. Though if you did show consistent ability, that might open up some interesting possibilities." Sarah's mind raced. She had come here to write a story about military precision. She had never imagined becoming part of the story herself. The rational part of her brain said to decline politely, to stick to her role as an observer, to maintain professional distance. But then, she remembered that moment behind the rifle. The weight of it, the focus through the scope, and that split second when everything had seemed to align perfectly. She had felt something in that moment, something she couldn't name, but couldn't ignore either. "When?" she asked. Harrison allowed himself a small smile. "Tomorrow morning. 0600. Bring comfortable clothes and an open mind." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah drove back to her apartment in San Diego, her shoulder still aching from the recoil. She tried to work on other articles to distract herself, but found her mind wandering back to the range. She researched long-range shooting online, reading about ballistics and environmental factors, about the physics and the psychology of precision marksmanship. That evening, she called her best friend Rachel, a fellow journalist who worked for a newspaper in Los Angeles. Rachel listened as Sarah explained what had happened, though Sarah found herself downplaying the significance of the shot, framing it as a fluke. "So let me get this straight," Rachel said when Sarah finished. "You accidentally fired a sniper rifle and hit a target the size of a dinner plate from over half a mile away?" It's not quite that dramatic, Sarah protested. Sarah, that's incredibly dramatic. That's movie-level dramatic. What are you going to do? I'm going back tomorrow to try again. There was a pause on the line. Really? I thought you hated guns. I don't hate them. I just never had much interest in them before. And now? Sarah considered the question. Now I'm curious. What if it wasn't just luck? What if there's actually something to this? Rachel's voice took on a concerned tone. Be careful, okay? You're a journalist, not a soldier. Don't lose sight of who you are because of one weird moment. After they hung up, Sarah sat on her couch for a long time, thinking about Rachel's warning. Her friend was right to be concerned. Sarah had built her career on objectivity, on maintaining distance from her subjects. Getting personally involved in military training seemed like a clear violation of that principle. But another voice in her head argued back. Wasn't experiencing something firsthand the best way to write about it? Didn't she owe it to her readers to truly understand what she was reporting on? And beneath those professional justifications was something more personal, something harder to articulate. She wanted to know if she could do it again. Sarah went to bed early but slept poorly, her dreams filled with impossible distances and tiny targets. She arrived at the base the next morning just as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. Harrison was already at the range, along with two other SEALs Sarah recognized from the day before. They had set up a different shooting position, this one with better equipment and more careful organization. Morning, Harrison greeted her. How's the shoulder? Sore, Sarah admitted. I think I have a bruise the size of Texas. Yeah, that'll happen. We'll work on your positioning today, so the recoil is more manageable. He gestured to the shooting line. Ready? Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. The next 3 hours were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Harrison started with basics, teaching her how to properly establish a shooting position, how to control her breathing, how to read wind flags, and calculate corrections. He explained the mechanics of the rifle, the characteristics of the ammunition, the way temperature and humidity affected bullet trajectory. Sarah absorbed it all with intense focus. She found herself understanding concepts quickly, seeing connections between different factors almost instinctively. When Harrison described how to read mirage through the scope to gauge wind conditions, Sarah immediately grasped the principle. When he explained the importance of natural point of aim, her body seemed to know what he meant before her mind fully processed the words. You're a fast learner, Harrison commented after she correctly estimated the distance to a target using just the mil dots in her scope. I used to do a lot of photography, Sarah explained. Working with focal length and depth of field, it's kind of similar in a way. Interesting connection. Never thought of it like that. They started with closer targets, 300 meters, then 400. Harrison loaded the rifle for her, gave her specific aiming points, walked her through each shot. Sarah fired slowly, carefully, trying to replicate the feeling she had experienced during the accidental discharge. Her first few shots were misses, which seemed to relieve everyone slightly. It suggested that the previous day's hit had indeed been luck, an impossible coincidence that could be dismissed and forgotten. But as Sarah settled into the rhythm of shooting, as she began to understand how the rifle responded, something began to change. Her fourth shot hit the target at 400 meters, slightly right of center. Her sixth shot was even closer. By the time they moved to 500 meters, she was consistently hitting within a few inches of where Harrison told her to aim. The SEALs watching began to pay closer attention. This was still within the realm of explained performance. Some people were natural shots, and, with proper instruction, they could achieve decent accuracy fairly quickly. But there was something about the way Sarah approached each shot that caught their attention. She moved with a deliberate grace, settling into position as if she had done it 1,000 times before. How does this feel? Harrison asked her during a break. Sarah considered the question as she sipped water. Comfortable. More comfortable than it should, probably. It's like when you try a new sport and your body just seems to know what to do, you know. Some people have that, Harrison agreed. Natural kinesthetic awareness. Good hand-eye coordination. But what you're showing goes beyond that. They moved to 600 meters. Then 700. At each distance, Sarah needed a few shots to gauge the conditions and understand what the rifle needed. But once she found the rhythm, her accuracy was remarkable. Not perfect by military standards, She still made mistakes, still had shots that went wide, but far better than anyone with less than a day of actual trigger time should be able to achieve. When they reached 800 meters, Harrison paused. This was the distance that separated recreational shooters from true precision marksmen. At this range, every tiny variable mattered. A 1-degree difference in wind angle could push a bullet several feet off target. Elevation changes of just a few hundred feet altered the required hold. The ammunition's temperature affected velocity. Even the shooter's heartbeat could disrupt aim. "This is where it gets real," Harrison told Sarah as she settled into position. "At this distance, you can't just point and shoot. You have to read the environment, make calculations, trust your data." Sarah nodded, peering through her scope at the target. It looked impossibly small, a tiny square of steel that seemed to waver in the heat shimmer rising from the ground. She checked the wind flags, noted how they pointed left to right at varying angles. She felt the temperature on her skin, remembered the elevation data Harrison had given her. Her first shot missed, striking the dirt 2 feet short of the target. Harrison helped her correct, explaining that she had underestimated the distance slightly. Her second shot went high and right. The third was closer, but still off target. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. She thought about the accidental shot from yesterday, trying to remember exactly how it had felt in that instant before the rifle fired. There had been no thinking, no calculation, just a moment of absolute clarity. When she opened her eyes again, something had shifted in her awareness. She settled into the rifle, let her breathing slow naturally, and looked through the scope with a soft focus that seemed to take in everything at once. The wind, the target, the feel of the weapon, it all became part of a single, unified perception. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared and bucked. Through the scope, Sarah saw the dust settle around a fresh impact mark right in the center of the steel plate. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it, but the spotter called out the hit, and Harrison let out a low whistle. Again, Harrison said quietly, "Let's see if you can do it again." Sarah fired 5 more shots at 800 meters. 3 of them hit the target. The 2 that missed were close enough that under combat conditions, they would have been effective shots. The small group that had gathered to watch had grown silent, their skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. One of the SEALs, a weathered chief petty officer named Marcus Thompson, approached Harrison with a serious expression. Sarah couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Harrison nod several times, then glance back at her with an unreadable expression. "Let's take a break," Harrison announced. "Sarah, walk with me." They walked to the far end of the range, away from the others. The morning sun was getting hot now, and Sarah could feel sweat starting to trickle down her back. Her shoulder throbbed with each step, but she barely noticed. She was still buzzing from the shots, from the feeling of doing something that felt simultaneously foreign and utterly natural. "What you're showing here is unusual," Harrison began. "I want to be straight with you about that. Most people train for months before they can consistently hit targets at these ranges. You're doing it after a few hours of instruction. Is that bad?" Sarah asked, uncertain how to read his tone. "No, it's not bad. It's just rare. Extremely rare." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "Chief Thompson just asked me if you had any prior military experience that you didn't disclose. Some kind of special training or background that would explain this." "I don't," Sarah said firmly. "I mean, I did basic self-defense courses in college, and I took that handgun safety class for the article last year, but nothing like this. Nothing with rifles." Harrison nodded slowly. "That's what I told him. Which brings us to an interesting question. Do you want to keep going? You mean try longer distances?" "I mean all of it. Real training. Serious instruction. If you're willing, and if you can pass the necessary clearances and evaluations, I might be able to arrange something unusual. Maybe a series of embedded experiences that would give you deeper access for your articles. But it would require commitment, time, physical training." Sarah's heart was racing. This was far beyond anything she had imagined when she woke up yesterday morning. This was crossing a line from observer to participant, from journalist to something else entirely. "I need to think about it," she said. "Fair enough. But, Sarah, whatever you decide, you should know this. What you did yesterday, what you're doing today, this isn't just beginner's luck or good coaching. You have a gift. A genuine, Measurable talent for something that most people can never master no matter how hard they try. That means something. As they walked back to the others, Sarah's mind churned with possibilities and concerns. She thought about her career, her credibility as a journalist, the ethics of becoming part of the story she was supposed to be covering. But she also thought about the feeling of the rifle in her hands, the satisfaction of seeing the target react to her shot, the sense of doing something that her body and mind seemed built for. That evening, back in her apartment, Sarah pulled up her laptop and started writing. Not the article she had planned about military training, but something more personal. A first-hand account of discovering an unexpected ability, of confronting a talent she never knew she had. She wrote for hours, the words flowing faster than they had in months. When she finally stopped, exhausted, she read back over what she had written and realized something. She had already made her decision. Not consciously, not through careful reasoning, but through the simple act of writing about it with such passion. She was going back to that range. And whatever came next, whatever complications or opportunities arose from this strange turn of events, she was ready to face them. The next morning, Sarah sent Commander Harrison an email with just 3 words. "I'm in. When do we start?" The arrangement that Commander Harrison worked out was unconventional, but then, again, everything about Sarah's situation was unconventional. She would continue her work as a journalist, maintaining her professional independence and credentials. But she would also undergo basic marksmanship training with the SEAL team, framed as an extended embedded journalism project that would give her unprecedented access to write about special operations training from the inside. The paperwork alone took 2 weeks. Background checks, security clearances, liability waivers, and endless forms that Sarah had to sign and initial. Her editor at the magazine was thrilled with the angle, seeing it as a unique opportunity for content. Her colleagues were less enthusiastic, with several questioning whether she was compromising her objectivity. Sarah wrestled with those same questions during the sleepless nights before training began. She had always prided herself on maintaining professional distance, on being the observer rather than the participant. But another part of her argued that experiencing something firsthand was the ultimate form of research. And beneath all the professional justifications was a simple truth she could no longer deny. She wanted this. Not just as a journalist, but as someone who had discovered an ability that demanded to be explored. Training began on a Monday morning in early autumn. Sarah arrived at the base before dawn, dressed in the athletic clothes Harrison had specified. She had been running every morning for the past 2 weeks, trying to build up her fitness level, but she still felt woefully unprepared when she saw the other trainees gathered at the starting point. They were all military personnel, most of them already trained in basic marksmanship and looking to advance their skills. Sarah was the only civilian, the only woman, and by far the least physically prepared. The looks she got ranged from curious to skeptical to outright hostile. A few of the men made comments just loud enough for her to hear about journalists playing soldier. Harrison introduced her to the group without fanfare. "This is Sarah Matthews. She's here under special arrangement as an embedded journalist. She'll be training alongside you and following the same standards. Any questions?" A tall Marine sergeant named Rodriguez raised his hand. "Will she be getting any special treatment, sir?" "Negative," Harrison replied firmly. "Same expectations for everyone. If she can't meet the standard, she's out. Just like any of you." Over the next 6 weeks, Sarah learned just how high those standards were. The days started at 5 in the morning and often didn't end until after dark. Physical training came first, brutal sessions of running, calisthenics, and functional fitness that left Sarah's muscles screaming. She struggled through the workouts, frequently finishing last but refusing to quit. The other trainees watched her with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. During a particularly difficult obstacle course run in the 2nd week, Sarah fell behind badly, her arms giving out on a rope climb. Rodriguez, the Marine who had questioned her presence, jogged back to find her sitting at the base of the rope, fighting back tears of frustration. "You okay?" he asked, his tone less hostile than before. "My arms are done," Sarah admitted. "I can't pull myself up." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then said, "Use your legs more. Wrap the rope around your foot, push up with your legs, then pull with your arms." It's not all upper body strength. He demonstrated the technique, and Sarah tried again. This time she made it halfway up before her grip failed. But she had learned something, and the next day she made it to the top. The shooting instruction was more advanced than anything Sarah had experienced during her initial sessions with Harrison. They covered positions she had never tried, shooting from vehicles, from barricades, from awkward angles that tested her adaptability. They practiced in rain, in darkness, in wind that made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Through it all, Sarah's natural ability continued to manifest in ways that surprised even Harrison. While she struggled with the physical demands of training, while her tactical knowledge lagged behind the experienced military trainees, her raw shooting ability was undeniable. Give her a stable position and clear conditions, and she could make shots that veteran marksmen found challenging. By the third week, the other trainees' attitudes had begun to shift. Sarah earned respect not through her shooting ability alone, but through her refusal to quit despite being clearly out of her depth. She was always first to arrive and last to leave. When she failed at something, she tried again. When the physical training broke her down, she came back the next day. One evening after a particularly grueling day, Chief Thompson approached Sarah as she was cleaning her rifle. "You're doing better than I expected," he admitted. "Most civilians would have quit by now." "I've thought about it," Sarah said honestly. "Every morning when my alarm goes off at 4:30, I think about quitting." "But you don't." "No," Sarah agreed. "I guess I'm stubborn." Thompson smiled. "Stubbornness is an underrated quality in this line of work. But there's something else I've noticed about you. When you're behind that rifle, something changes. You get this focus that's hard to teach. Where did that come from?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question for weeks. "I honestly don't know. My dad died when I was young, car accident. I barely remember him. My mom raised me and my brother alone. We didn't have guns in the house. I never showed any interest in shooting until that day I came here as a journalist." "Interesting," Thompson mused. "Sometimes talents are like that. They just show up one day, and you realize they've always been there, waiting." The comment stuck with Sarah. That night, she called her mother for the first time in weeks, something she felt guilty about given how busy training had kept her. "Sarah, honey, I've been worried about you," her mother said. "Your messages have been so brief. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just really busy with work." Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something about Dad?" There was a pause on the line. Sarah's mother rarely talked about her father, the pain of losing him still sharp even after 25 years. "Of course, sweetie. What do you want to know? Did he ever shoot? Like, recreationally or anything?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking about that?" "Just something I'm working on for an article. I realized I don't know much about his hobbies." "Well," her mother began slowly, "your father was in the military before I met him. Army, I think. He didn't talk about it much, but I know he had some kind of specialized training. He used to go to a shooting range sometimes, said it helped him clear his head." "What?" Sarah felt her heart rate increase. "Did he ever mention being good at it?" "At shooting? He had some kind of competition trophies packed away in boxes. Long-range shooting or something like that." "Sarah, what's this really about?" Sarah took a deep breath and told her mother everything. About the accidental shot, about the training, about the ability she had discovered. Her mother listened quietly, and when Sarah finished, there was a long silence. "I should have told you before," her mother finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father was a sniper. Army Special Forces. He never wanted to talk about it, what he had done, what he had seen. When he died, I packed away all his military things and tried to put that part of his life behind us. I didn't want you kids growing up in the shadow of his service." Sarah's hands were shaking. "Mom, why didn't you ever mention this?" "Because it scared me, honey. The thought of you or your brother following in those footsteps, putting yourselves in danger. I wanted different lives for you both." After they hung up, Sarah sat in darkness for a long time, processing this new information. Her ability wasn't just random chance or inexplicable talent. It was inherited, passed down from a father she barely remembered. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. It explained her aptitude, but also raised new questions about fate, about whether she was choosing this path or being pulled along by genetics. The next day, Sarah approached Harrison before training began and told him what she had learned. He listened carefully, then nodded. That makes sense. There's definitely a hereditary component to some of the factors that make a good shooter. Hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, emotional regulation under stress. You inherited the raw tools, and somehow your brain knows how to use them. Does it change anything? Sarah asked. Only if you want it to, Harrison replied. You're still the one pulling the trigger. Your father's abilities don't diminish what you've accomplished here. The training continued to intensify. They moved to more advanced techniques, shooting while moving, engaging multiple targets, compensating for extreme environmental conditions. Sarah struggled with the tactical aspects, the decision-making under pressure that came naturally to the experienced operators, but felt foreign to her journalist brain. During a complex drill involving target identification and shoot-no-shoot scenarios, Sarah made a critical error. She misread a target indicator and took a shot at what turned out to be a hostage silhouette rather than a threat. Harrison called an immediate halt to the exercise. Matthews, what just happened? He demanded. I made a mistake, Sarah admitted, feeling sick. I saw the weapon and didn't process the position indicators. In a real situation, you just killed an innocent person. The words hit Sarah hard. Up until that moment, she had been focused on the technical aspects of shooting, the satisfaction of hitting difficult targets. But Harrison's stark statement reminded her that the skills she was learning had real-world applications, life and death consequences that went far beyond her journalistic curiosity. I understand, sir, she said quietly. Harrison's expression softened slightly. This is why we train. Better to make mistakes here than out there. But it's also a reminder that shooting ability alone doesn't make a sniper. Judgment matters. Ethics matter. Understanding the weight of what you're doing matters. That night, Sarah struggled with doubt more seriously than she had since the beginning. She had come so far, proven so much, but Harrison's words had exposed a truth she had been avoiding. She wasn't just learning a skill. She was learning how to kill from a distance, and no amount of inherited ability changed the moral complexity of that fact. She wrote in her journal, something she had done less frequently as training consumed more of her time and energy. The words came slowly, each one weighted with the day's lesson. She wrote about responsibility, about the difference between talent and wisdom, about whether her father had struggled with these same questions. The next morning, Sarah requested a private meeting with Harrison. They met in his office, a sparse room decorated only with a few photos and commendations. I need to know something, Sarah began. If I continue with this, if I get good enough, what happens then? What would you expect from me? Harrison leaned back in his chair. That's up to you. You're still a civilian, still a journalist. There's no obligation beyond the training itself. But I'll be honest with you. We don't invest this kind of time and resources in someone without hoping there might be future value. If you developed into a truly exceptional shooter, there could be opportunities. Consulting, specialized instruction, maybe even contractor work in certain situations. Would I have to join the military? Not necessarily. There are civilians who work with special operations in various capacities. But any operational role would require much more than shooting ability. It would require tactical training, psychological evaluation, and a willingness to operate in dangerous environments. Sarah absorbed this information. And if I just wanted to finish this training and go back to journalism, use what I've learned to write better stories, then that's what you do, Harrison said simply. Look, Sarah, nobody here is trying to recruit you against your will. What we're offering is a chance to explore an ability you didn't know you had. Where it goes from there is your choice. The conversation clarified things for Sarah. She wasn't trapped by this path. She was walking it voluntarily, and she could step off whenever she chose. But, for now, she wanted to see how far she could go, to understand the full scope of this inherited gift. The training entered its final phase in the 8th week. The focus shifted to ultra-long-range shooting, distances beyond 1,000 meters where the slightest error could result in massive misses. This was where the true artists of the craft distinguished themselves from merely competent shooters. Sarah and the other trainees traveled to a remote range in the desert, where targets had been positioned at distances up to 1,400 meters. The environment was harsh, with swirling winds and heat that created unpredictable mirage effects. Even Harrison acknowledged that these conditions challenged his own abilities. On the first day, None of the trainees could consistently hit targets beyond 1,100 meters. Sarah struggled like everyone else, her shots scattering wide despite her best efforts. The distances were simply too great, the variables too numerous. But, on the second day, something clicked. Sarah stopped trying to calculate everything, stopped overthinking the mechanics. Instead, she let her body and mind work together in that state of focused relaxation she had first experienced during the accidental shot months ago. She breathed, aimed, and fired with a confidence that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Her bullet struck the 1,300-meter target on the fourth shot. She hit it twice more in the next 5 attempts. The other trainees stopped their own practice to watch. Even the instructors gathered, checking and rechecking the measurements, confirming what seemed impossible. Rodriguez approached her after she cleared her weapon. "That's insane," he said, shaking his head. "I've been shooting for 10 years, and I can't touch that." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She felt almost embarrassed by the attention, by having an ability that exceeded her knowledge and experience. "I got lucky," she offered. "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "That's not luck. That's something else entirely." That evening, as the sun set over the desert, Harrison pulled Sarah aside. "Tomorrow is the final qualification shoot. You'll need to demonstrate proficiency at multiple distances, various positions, different environmental conditions. If you pass, you'll have completed a course that many experienced military personnel fail. And if I don't pass, then you'll have still accomplished more than most people could in twice the time." Harrison smiled. "But I don't think you're going to fail, Sarah. I think you're going to surprise us all one more time." As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, exhausted and nervous about the next day, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. It had started with a joke, a playful tug on her arm that had accidentally triggered a shot that changed everything. She had discovered a father she never truly knew, a talent she never suspected, and a side of herself that had been hidden beneath years of professional detachment. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether she passed or failed, she knew that she had found something more important than marksmanship ability. She had found a connection to her past, a challenge that pushed her beyond what she thought possible, and a sense of purpose that riding alone had never quite provided. She closed her eyes, letting the desert silence wrap around her, and, for the first time in months, she slept without doubt. The morning of the qualification shoot dawned clear and cold. Sarah stood with the other trainees on the firing line, watching the first hints of sunrise paint the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. Beside her, Rodriguez shifted his weight nervously, and even the usually composed Chief Thompson seemed tense. The qualification was structured in 3 phases. First, they would engage targets from 300 to 600 meters using various positions and time constraints. Second, they would move to medium-long range, 700 to 900 meters, where environmental factors became critical. Finally, the extreme long-range phase would test them at distances up to 1,200 meters, where only the most skilled shooters consistently succeeded. Each trainee had to achieve a minimum score across all phases. Miss too many shots, and you failed regardless of how well you performed on other parts of the test. The scoring was unforgiving, designed to identify those who could perform under pressure rather than those who occasionally got lucky. Harrison reviewed the rules one final time, his voice carrying across the early morning stillness. "You each get 2 attempts at each target. If you miss both, you get a 0 for that engagement. 3 zeros in any phase means automatic failure. Time limits are strict. Equipment malfunctions are your problem to solve. Any questions?" There were none. Everyone knew what was at stake. Sarah drew the 4th shooting position out of 8 trainees. She watched as the first 3 shooters took their turns, each one displaying the nervousness that comes with high-pressure evaluation. The first shooter, an Army Ranger named Mills, performed solidly through the initial phase, hitting 7 out of 10 targets. The second shooter struggled with a rifle malfunction that cost him precious time. The third, a Marine Corps Scout sniper instructor who everyone expected to ace the course, surprised everyone by missing 3 consecutive shots at 500 meters and failing out immediately. The instructor's failure sent a wave of anxiety through the remaining shooters. If someone with his experience and credentials could fail so quickly, anyone could. Sarah felt her own stomach tighten as she moved to the firing line for her turn. "Stay calm," Harrison said quietly as he handed her the rifle. "Trust your training. Trust yourself." Sarah nodded, taking the weapon and moving to the first shooting position. The initial target was at 300 meters, a relatively easy shot from the prone position. She had 90 seconds to locate the target, get into position, and engage it twice. As soon as the timer started, Sarah's nervousness evaporated. It was like stepping into a different mental state, one where the noise of worry and self-doubt simply didn't exist. She dropped into the prone position smoothly, found the target through her scope, controlled her breathing, and fired. The first round struck center mass. 5 seconds later, the second round hit just inches away. 2 hits, the spotter confirmed. Moving to next target. The phase continued. Standing position at 350 meters. Kneeling at 400. Sitting position at 450. Each target required a different approach, different considerations for stability and recoil management. Sarah moved through them with a fluid confidence that surprised even her. She missed one shot at 500 meters due to a wind shift she didn't anticipate, but her follow-up shot found the mark. When she cleared the first phase with only 2 misses out of 20 shots, the observers exchanged significant looks. That was championship-level performance, especially for someone so new to the discipline. Rodriguez went next and performed well, though not as cleanly as Sarah. He advanced to the second phase with 4 misses, still well within the acceptable range. Chief Thompson, shooting 6th, demonstrated the value of experience by missing only once in the entire first phase. The second phase began an hour later, after all shooters had completed the first stage. The morning sun was higher now, creating heat shimmer that made targets waver and dance. Wind conditions had picked up, flags showing variable directions and speeds at different distances. This was where theoretical knowledge met practical application, where shooters had to read conditions and make real-time calculations. Sarah's first target in this phase was at 700 meters. She settled into position, studied the wind flags carefully, and made her calculations. The wind was stronger than anything she had shot in during training, gusting from left to right at what looked like 15 knots. She held further left than felt natural, trusting the math, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dirt 2 feet right of the target. Sarah felt a flash of panic, but forced it down. She had one more shot. She recalculated, held even further left, and fired again. This time the bullet found steel, the distinctive ping of the impact carrying back across the desert. 1 hit, the spotter called. Moving to next target. The phase was grueling. Targets appeared and disappeared on time limits. Wind conditions changed unpredictably. The heat became oppressive as the sun climbed higher, sweat stinging Sarah's eyes despite the headband she wore. She missed entirely at 800 meters, both shots sailing wide. At 850, she connected on her first attempt. At 900, she needed both shots to register a hit. When the phase ended, Sarah had registered hits on 6 of 8 targets. It wasn't perfect, but it was passing. She moved aside, physically and mentally exhausted, and watched as Rodriguez struggled through his own attempt. The Marine, for all his experience and training, couldn't find his rhythm in the difficult conditions. He registered only 4 hits and failed the qualification. "Rough break," Sarah told him as he walked past, his face a mask of frustration. "You shoot like you were born doing it," Rodriguez said, not unkindly. "I hope you realize how unusual that is." By the time everyone completed the second phase, only 4 shooters remained in the qualification. Sarah, Chief Thompson, an Army Special Forces sergeant named Williams, and a Navy SEAL named Drake who had barely squeaked through with exactly the minimum required hits. The extreme long-range phase began after a lunch break. This was the crown jewel of the qualification, the part that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. The targets were positioned at 1,000 meters, 1,100 meters, and 1,200 meters. Each shooter would engage one target at each distance, with 2 attempts per target. The distances were staggering. Even through high-powered optics, the targets looked impossibly small. Environmental factors that were merely challenging at shorter ranges became dominant at these distances. A 5-mile-per-hour wind change could move the bullet several feet. Temperature variations affected bullet velocity enough to cause misses. Even the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, had to be accounted for. Chief Thompson shot first at this phase, demonstrating why he held his rank and reputation. He connected on 5 of 6 possible shots, an outstanding performance that would be hard to match. Williams went next and managed 3 hits, enough to pass, but nowhere near Thompson's standard. Drake struggled, managing only 2 hits, which meant he failed the overall qualification. Then, it was Sarah's turn. She approached the shooting position with her heart pounding. This was it, the culmination of months of training and discovery. Everything came down to the next few minutes. Harrison helped her settle into position, his presence calm and steadying. Range to first target is 1,000 meters even, Harrison said. Wind is left to right at approximately 12 knots. Temperature is 86 degrees. You've made these calculations before. You can do this. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She peered through the scope at the first target. So far away it seemed like a different world. She went through her mental checklist, calculating the necessary adjustments, feeling the weight of the rifle, centering herself in that focused state where nothing existed except the shot. She fired. Through the scope, she saw dust kick up 3 feet short and 2 feet left of the target. Miss, the spotter called. 1 round remaining. Sarah's mind raced. She had underestimated the distance and overcorrected for wind. She made rapid adjustments and fired again. This time the bullet struck the lower right edge of the target, barely connecting, but definitely a hit. Impact, the spotter confirmed. 1 hit at 1,000 meters. The relief was immense, but brief. Sarah still had 2 more targets to engage. She moved to the 1,100-meter position, and the difficulty increased proportionally. At this distance, the target was barely visible even through magnified optics. The wind had shifted, now blowing at an angle that made calculation more complex. Sarah took her time, working through the math carefully. She fired, and the bullet vanished into the desert without any visible impact. It could have struck anywhere within a 100-foot radius. She was shooting blind, trusting pure calculation. For her second attempt, Sarah closed her eyes briefly and thought about her father. She had never known him, never heard his voice or felt his guidance. But, in this moment, she felt connected to him through this inherited ability, through the understanding that he too had faced these same challenges, made these same calculations, taken these same impossible shots. She opened her eyes, made a small adjustment to her aim, and fired. 3 seconds passed. Then 4. Then, the spotter's voice crackled over the radio. Hit. Contact on target at 1,100 meters. Sarah barely heard the cheers from the other trainees and instructors. She was already focusing on the final target, the one at 1,200 meters. This was the distance she had achieved during training, the shot that had amazed even Harrison. But that had been under ideal conditions, with unlimited time and no pressure. This was different. She settled into position for what would be her last 2 shots regardless of the outcome. If she hit either one, she would pass the qualification with flying colors. If she missed both, she would still pass overall, but with a less impressive score. But Sarah wasn't thinking about passing anymore. She was thinking about what was possible, about pushing herself to the absolute limit of her ability. The 1,200-meter target sat at the extreme edge of effective range for the rifle system she was using. At that distance, the bullet would drop over 40 feet from the bore line. It would drift horizontally by 10 or 15 feet in the wind. The flight time would be nearly 2 seconds, during which countless variables could affect the trajectory. Sarah went through her calculations 3 times, double-checking everything. Then, she did something that made Harrison tense beside her. She disregarded half her calculations and instead let her intuition take over. It was the approach that had worked during that first accidental shot, during her best performances in training. Sometimes the math got you close, but instinct got you on target. She fired. The waiting was agonizing. At this distance, there was no way to see the bullet impact with the naked eye. Only the spotting scope could confirm a hit or miss, and even that required perfect conditions and sharp eyes. Checking, the spotter said, his voice uncertain. More silence. Then, I've got impact about 2 feet high and 1 foot right. No hit. Sarah had 1 shot left. One chance to end this qualification on a perfect note. She could play it safe, aim center mass, and hope for the best. Or she could trust the information from her miss, make adjustments, and try again. She chose to trust. Sarah lowered her aim slightly and shifted her hold to compensate for the drift her first shot had revealed. She controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate settle. She pressed her cheek firmly against the stock, ensuring perfect consistency with her previous shot. And then, in that moment of absolute stillness before the trigger broke, she felt it. That sense of rightness, of alignment, of everything coming together perfectly. The rifle roared. The bullet left the barrel at over 2,500 feet per second. It climbed into an arc, fighting gravity and wind resistance. It traveled through varying densities of air, through temperature gradients that bent its path in subtle ways. For nearly 2 full seconds, it flew through space, covering a distance of nearly 3/4 of a mile. And then it struck steel. The sharp ping of the impact echoed across the desert. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Harrison let out a whoop of triumph that was completely out of character for his usually reserved demeanor. Chief Thompson was shaking his head in disbelief. The other instructors were checking and rechecking their spotting scopes, confirming what seemed impossible. Sarah had hit the 1,200-meter target on her final shot. She cleared the rifle with shaking hands and stood up, her legs unsteady. Rodriguez was there immediately, along with Williams and several others, congratulating her and pounding her back. Sarah accepted the praise with a dazed smile, still trying to process what she had just accomplished. Harrison pulled her aside once the initial celebration died down. "Do you understand what you just did?" he asked quietly. "I passed the qualification," Sarah offered. "You didn't just pass. You scored higher than anyone I've trained in the past 5 years. Higher than some people I've trained in the past 15 years. And you did it after less than 3 months of dedicated training. Is that unusual?" Harrison laughed, a genuine sound of amazement. "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it. What you have, Sarah, what you demonstrated today, this is exceptional. This is a gift that maybe one person in 100,000 possesses." The official scores were posted an hour later. Chief Thompson had scored 92 out of 100 possible points. Williams had scored 78. Sarah had scored 94, the highest score in the class, and one of the highest scores Harrison had ever recorded. That evening, there was a small ceremony where the successful candidates received certificates of completion. Sarah stood with Thompson and Williams as Harrison presented their credentials. Looking at the certificate, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what she had achieved, certainly, but also uncertainty about what came next, about what this meant for her identity and her future. After the ceremony, Sarah found a quiet spot away from the celebration and called her mother. When her mom answered, Sarah could hear the worry in her voice immediately. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" "I passed," Sarah said simply. "The qualification. I passed with the highest score." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, her mother's voice, thick with emotion. "Your father would have been so proud of you." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I wish I could have known him, really known him." "Maybe you do know him," her mother said gently. "Maybe in a way that's more real than memory. You carry part of him in you, Sarah. Not just his abilities, but his character, his determination, his refusal to quit when things got hard. I see all of that in you." They talked for another hour, with Sarah's mother sharing stories about her father that she had never told before. Stories about his dedication, his precision, his quiet confidence in his abilities. With each story, Sarah felt a deeper connection to the man she had never truly known, understanding now that she was walking a path he had walked before her. When Sarah finally returned to the group, she found Harrison waiting for her with a serious expression. "We need to talk about your next steps," he said. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" Sarah asked. "I'm exhausted." "Tomorrow's fine," Harrison agreed. "But, Sarah, you need to start thinking seriously about this. You've proven you have an extraordinary ability. The question now is what you want to do with it. Because I can promise you, there are going to be opportunities. Some of them will be simple and straightforward. Others will be complex and potentially dangerous. You need to decide who you are and what you want to be." As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, she thought about Harrison's words. 3 months ago, She had been a journalist covering a routine training exercise. Now she was a qualified precision marksman with scores that put her in elite company. The transformation felt both natural and surreal, as if she had become someone else while somehow remaining herself. She thought about her father, about the legacy he had left her without even knowing he was doing so. She thought about the weight of the rifle in her hands, the satisfaction of making impossible shots, the sense of purpose that came from mastering something so difficult. And she thought about the future, about the choices that lay ahead, about the person she was becoming. Tomorrow would bring decisions and complications. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to simply rest in the accomplishment, to savor the feeling of having discovered something profound about herself. She had found a connection to her past, demonstrated a capability that defied easy explanation, and proven that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones we make about ourselves. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was not about shooting or training or qualifications. It was simpler, more fundamental. She had come to this place as an observer, trying to understand something from the outside. She was leaving as a participant, someone who had looked into herself and found capabilities she never knew existed. And somehow, that made all the difference. Sarah returned to her normal life after the qualification, but nothing felt normal anymore. Her apartment seemed smaller, the routine of article deadlines and editorial meetings less engaging. She had spent 3 months living at an intensity that civilian life couldn't match, and the contrast was jarring. She found herself waking at 5 in the morning out of habit, her body expecting physical training that no longer came. The article she wrote about her experience caused a sensation. Her editor wanted to lead with the human interest angle, the journalist who discovered an inherited talent for precision shooting. But Sarah pushed back, insisting on a more nuanced piece that explored what it meant to be good at something designed for warfare, the moral weight of developing lethal skills, and the connection between talent and purpose. The magazine featured her story on the cover with the headline, "The Accidental Sniper." Within days, it went viral. Television producers called wanting interviews. Other publications requested follow-up pieces. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm she hadn't anticipated. Not all the attention was positive. Some critics accused her of glorifying violence. Others questioned whether she had compromised her journalistic integrity by becoming part of the story. A few military commentators suggested she was appropriating military culture for personal gain. The criticism stung, especially because Sarah had been wrestling with similar questions herself. 2 weeks after the article published, Commander Harrison called her. His voice on the phone was measured, professional. "You've stirred up quite a conversation. How are you handling it?" "Some days better than others," Sarah admitted. "I knew it would be controversial, but I didn't expect this level of reaction. The military community is talking about you too. Not everyone is happy about a civilian receiving the kind of training you got. But there are also people who are impressed, who see potential." Harrison paused. "That's actually why I'm calling. I have a proposition for you." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had been expecting this call, dreading it, and anticipating it in equal measure. Harrison continued. "There's a private military contracting firm that does training and consultation work for various government agencies. They're interested in bringing you on as an instructor, teaching long-range shooting fundamentals to law enforcement and security personnel. It would be legitimate work, good pay, and you'd be using your skills in a way that helps people." "What's the catch?" Sarah asked. "No catch exactly, but it would mean making a choice. You'd be stepping away from journalism, at least as your primary career. You'd be defining yourself differently. And once you go down that road, it's hard to come back." Sarah had been thinking about this constantly since completing her training. On paper, returning to her journalism career made sense. It was what she knew, what she had built her adult life around. But every time she sat down to write about conventional subjects, she felt a restlessness she couldn't ignore. She had discovered something in herself that demanded more than observation and documentation. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take your time. But, Sarah, I want you to understand something. The shooting ability is impressive, truly exceptional. But it's not the most important thing. What matters more is judgment, ethics, the wisdom to know when to use that ability and when not to. That's what I saw in you during training. not just the skill, but the thoughtfulness about what it means. After the call ended, Sarah sat with her thoughts for a long time. She made a list of pros and cons, trying to approach the decision rationally. The journalism career offered stability, familiar territory, the satisfaction of telling important stories. The instructor position offered challenge, the chance to develop her abilities further, and a connection to the part of herself she had discovered. But the decision wasn't really about career paths or practical considerations. It was about identity, about choosing between who she had been and who she was becoming. Sarah called her mother that evening. "I need advice," she began, then explained Harrison's offer and her confusion about what to do. Her mother listened quietly, then said something that surprised Sarah. "When your father left the military, he struggled with the transition. He had been so good at what he did, had found such purpose in it. Civilian life felt empty by comparison. He tried to be happy, and in many ways he was, especially after you were born. But there was always a part of him that missed it, that felt incomplete." "I never knew that," Sarah said softly. "He never wanted you to follow his path. He saw too much darkness in that world. But he also never wanted you to ignore your gifts, to live smaller than you were meant to. If he were here now, I think he'd tell you to be honest with yourself about what you need, even if it's not the safe choice." The conversation gave Sarah clarity, though not the kind she expected. She realized she had been looking for permission to make a choice she had already made. She wanted this new path, wanted to see where her abilities could take her, wanted to honor the legacy her father had left her even if he never intended to leave it. The next day, Sarah called Harrison back. "I'm interested in the instructor position, but I have conditions." "I'm listening," Harrison said. "I want to continue my journalism work, at least part-time. I think there's value in bridging those worlds, in writing about this community from the inside, while also contributing to it. And I want the freedom to turn down assignments that don't align with my values. I'm not interested in teaching people I don't believe should be armed." "Fair terms," Harrison agreed. "I'll pass them along and see what they say." The contracting firm accepted Sarah's conditions, and she began her new role 2 months later. The transition was challenging. She had to learn not just how to shoot, but how to teach others to shoot. She discovered that explaining techniques she performed instinctively required breaking down her process in ways she had never considered. Her first students were police SWAT team members preparing for complex urban operations. They were skeptical at first, some of them uncomfortable taking instruction from someone so new to the field. But Sarah won them over through a combination of demonstrated ability and genuine humility. She never claimed to know more than she did, never pretended her few months of training equaled their years of service. Instead, she focused on the specific area where she excelled and helped them understand the mental and physical aspects of precision shooting. One of her students, a veteran police sniper named Marcus, approached her after a particularly successful training session. "You've got a gift for this teaching thing," he said. "You explain concepts in a way that makes sense, like you remember what it was like not to know." "I do remember," Sarah said. "It was only 6 months ago." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "That's what I can't get over. 6 months ago you were a journalist who had never done this. Now you're teaching people who have been doing it for years. How do you even process that?" It was a question Sarah had asked herself repeatedly. The answer, she had discovered, was that she didn't really process it. She simply moved forward, accepting that her life had taken an unexpected turn and trying to navigate it with integrity and purpose. Sarah continued her journalism work alongside the instruction, writing pieces about military culture, training methodologies, and the psychology of high-performance skills. Her unique position, straddling the worlds of journalism and military training, gave her insights that few others could claim. Her articles became more nuanced, more thoughtful, informed by first-hand experience rather than outside observation. 6 months into her new role, Sarah received an unexpected message from Sergeant Torres, the SEAL whose playful tug had started everything. He apologized again for the incident, something he had done repeatedly over the months. But this time he added something new. "I've been thinking about that day a lot," Torres wrote. "At first I felt terrible about what happened, about putting you in danger with my stupid joke. But looking at where you are now, at what you've accomplished, I wonder if maybe it wasn't entirely a bad thing. Sometimes accidents reveal things that were supposed to be revealed. Sometimes the universe has a strange way of putting people where they need to be. Sarah read the message several times, considering his words. There was truth in what Torres said, though she would never describe that terrifying moment as a good thing. But it had been a catalyst, an unexpected door that opened onto a path she never would have found otherwise. She thought about the chain of events that had brought her to this point. Her father's service and talent passed down genetically. Her choice to become a journalist covering military stories. The random assignment to observe that specific training session. Torres's ill-timed joke. Harrison's decision to test her abilities. Every step had seemed like chance at the time, but looking back, it felt like a pattern, a story being written in real time. The opportunities continued to expand. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences about skill development and the psychology of learning. A documentary filmmaker wanted to make a film about her journey. Several book publishers reached out about memoir deals. She turned down most of the offers, uncomfortable with the level of attention and celebrity that came with her story. But she accepted an invitation to speak at a military training symposium, where she addressed an audience of instructors and commanders about unconventional paths to excellence. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of experienced military professionals, Sarah felt the weight of what she represented, not just personal success, but the possibility that talent could emerge from unexpected places and in unexpected ways. "I'm not here to tell you that anyone can be a sniper," Sarah began her speech. "That would be dishonest. What I can tell you is that ability doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it's hidden, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal it. And sometimes the most valuable skills are the ones we discover by accident, the ones that surprise us more than anyone else." She talked about her father, about carrying forward a legacy she never knew existed. She discussed the responsibility that came with developing lethal skills, the ethical questions that couldn't be ignored. And she emphasized the importance of character alongside capability, of judgment alongside technical proficiency. The speech was well received, though Sarah could see skepticism on some faces in the audience. She understood. Her story was unusual, almost unbelievable. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be standing here, having achieved what she had achieved, she would have thought they were crazy. After the symposium, Chief Thompson found her in the hallway. "Good speech," he said. "You're growing into this role well." "Some days I still feel like an imposter," Sarah admitted. Thompson smiled. "That's probably healthy. The people who worry me are the ones who never question themselves." He paused, then added, "Harrison wanted me to ask you something. There's a possibility of advanced training, stuff that goes beyond basic marksmanship. More tactical, more complex. It would require a bigger commitment, more time away from your other work." Interested, Sarah's immediate instinct was to say yes. The part of her that had been awakened by that first shot still hungered for challenge, for growth, for pushing the boundaries of what she could do. But she had learned caution over the past year, learned to consider the full implications of her choices. "What kind of tactical training?" she asked. "I can't give you details here," Thompson said. "But if you're interested, we can set up a briefing. You'd be working with a specialized unit, doing things that would make your journalism career complicated." Sarah understood the implication. The deeper she went into this world, the more she would be bound by security clearances and operational sensitivity. She might reach a point where she couldn't write about what she was doing, couldn't share the experiences that gave her work its unique perspective. "Let me think about it," she said. That night, Sarah went to a shooting range on her own, something she had started doing regularly for stress relief and contemplation. She set up at the 1,000-meter line and worked through a box of ammunition, each shot a meditation, a conversation with herself about who she was and who she wanted to be. She thought about the journalist she had been a year ago, focused on observation and analysis, keeping careful distance from her subjects. That person felt like someone else now, someone she remembered but could no longer fully inhabit. The experience of discovering and developing this ability had changed her in fundamental ways. But she also recognized that she didn't have to choose between competing identities. She could be both a journalist and a shooter, both an observer and a participant. The two roles informed each other, gave her insights that neither could provide alone. The question wasn't whether to choose one path over the other, but how to integrate them in a way that honored both. Sarah fired her last shot, watched it connect with the target, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. She would take the advanced training that Thompson had mentioned. She would continue her journalism work as long as security restrictions allowed. She would keep pushing herself, keep exploring this ability that had been hiding inside her all along. She packed up her equipment and drove home through the desert night, the stars brilliant overhead. Her phone buzzed with messages, her editor checking on a deadline, Harrison sending information about an upcoming training contract, her mother asking how she was doing. Sarah ignored them all for the moment, content to drive in silence and reflect on the strange journey her life had taken. A year ago, Sergeant Torres had tugged her arm as a joke. That simple action had triggered a shot that changed everything, that revealed an ability she never knew she possessed, that connected her to a father she barely remembered, that opened doors she never knew existed. Some people might call it fate or destiny. Others might say it was nothing more than genetic lottery and random chance. Sarah had stopped trying to categorize it. What mattered wasn't explaining how it happened, but what she chose to do with it. She had been given a gift, inherited from a father who never had the chance to pass it down intentionally. She had developed that gift through hard work and dedication, proving that talent alone wasn't enough without discipline and commitment. And now she had the opportunity to use that gift in ways that honored both her father's memory and her own values. The road stretched out before her, dark and winding but somehow familiar. Sarah pressed down on the accelerator, heading toward whatever came next with the same focused determination she brought to every shot. She didn't know where this path would ultimately lead, didn't know what challenges or opportunities awaited her. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. When that moment came, when she settled behind the rifle and peered through the scope at some distant target, she would be ready. Her breathing would slow. Her mind would clear. Her body would remember everything it had learned. And somewhere, in a way that transcended time and death, her father would be there with her, his legacy living on in every shot she took, in every target she hit, in every impossible thing she made possible. Sarah Matthews had started as an accidental sniper, but she had become something more, someone who understood that the greatest discoveries are the ones we make about ourselves, and that sometimes the most important gifts are the ones we never knew we were carrying all along. The rifle was just a tool. The targets were just steel and paper. What mattered was what lay behind the scope, the focus, the discipline, the character, and the choice to use an extraordinary ability in service of something larger than herself. She had found her purpose in the most unlikely way. And now, driving through the desert night toward an uncertain future, Sarah felt more certain about who she was than she had ever felt in her life. 850 meters. That was the distance of the shot that changed everything. But it was also just a beginning, the first step on a journey that had taught her more about herself than she ever imagined possible. And the journey, Sarah knew, was far from over.